3 years ago, I drove a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and a heater that only worked on the driver's side. I wore the same 4 flannel shirts on rotation. I ate lunch at the same diner every Tuesday, the one on Caldwell Street, where a cup of coffee still cost $1.50, and the waitress called everyone, "Hun." My name is Gerald. I am 67 years old, and the morning my son called to tell me he was getting married, I was sitting in that diner, cutting into a piece of apple pie, thinking about how Margaret would have loved the way the light came through the window that time of year. Margaret passed 4 years before that phone call. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the day I held her hand for the last time in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and grief. We had been married 31 years. She was a property manager by trade, a real estate investor by passion, and the sharpest mind I have ever known. I was an electrical engineer. I showed up to work, did my job, came home. Margaret was the one who saw opportunity in things other people walked past. A distressed duplex in a neighborhood everyone else had written off. A small commercial strip that nobody wanted because the anchor tenant had left. She had a gift. I always told her that. She would wave her hand and say, "Gerald, it's just math." But it wasn't. It was vision. What I am about to tell you, I have not told many people. Not my neighbors, not my coworkers from the firm where I spent 30 years, not the men I play cards with on Thursday nights. When Margaret died, she left behind a real estate portfolio that she had been quietly building for over 2 decades. 11 rental properties, 3 commercial units, 2 parcels of undeveloped land in counties that were just beginning to attract development interest. The total value, when her estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who Margaret had trusted since 1999, ran the full assessment, came to just over $4.3 million. I did not tell my son, Daniel. I want you to understand that I am not a deceptive man by nature. I am not someone who enjoys secrets or games. But Patricia had sat across from me in her office 6 weeks after the funeral, slid a folder across her desk, and said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Gerald, Margaret was very specific in her instructions. She wanted these assets protected in an LLC she had already established. She wanted you to be the sole managing member, and she asked me to tell you something directly." Patricia paused and looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, "Tell him to be quiet about it. Tell him the money will show who people really are, and I want him protected before it does." Margaret had known. Even from wherever she was going, she had known. So I kept quiet. I drove the old truck. I wore the flannel shirts. I let people think what they thought. Daniel was 29 when his mother died. He grieved. We both grieved. But Daniel had always been a little distant, not cruel, not a bad son, just the kind of man who keeps a careful emotional distance from everything, including his own father. He called on birthdays. He visited at Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas. He lived about 4 hours away in Raleigh and had built a life there that did not include much room for an aging father in an old truck. When he called to tell me about the wedding, I was genuinely happy for him. I had never met Brianna. He had mentioned her twice, maybe 3 times, always briefly. She was in finance, he said. Smart, he said. Ambitious. I told him I was glad. I asked when I could meet her. He said soon. I met her 6 weeks before the wedding, at a dinner Daniel organized at a restaurant in Raleigh that had cloth napkins and a wine list I could not read without my glasses. Brianna was 32, precise, and beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful as if they have practiced it. She shook my hand and smiled and asked me about myself. I told her I was retired, that I had been an engineer, that I lived simply up in Crestwood. She nodded. She had the kind of nod that means she has already categorized you and moved on. By the end of the dinner, she had asked Daniel about their investment timeline, about the neighborhood they were considering buying into, and about what kind of support they might expect from family going forward. She did not look at me when she said family, but I felt it. I drove home that night, and I sat in the driveway for a while with the engine off. I thought about what Margaret had said. I thought about Patricia's folder. I did not say anything to Daniel about what I had felt at that dinner. He was happy. That mattered to me. I wanted him to be happy. The wedding was in October. Small ceremony, a venue outside Chapel Hill, the trees just starting to turn. I wore my good suit, the charcoal one Margaret had picked out for me years ago. I sat in the front row and watched my son marry a woman I did not fully know, and I told myself that I was being unfair. that first impressions are not final ones. That Brianna deserved a chance to become the person I hoped she was. 11 days after the wedding, she called me. Not Daniel, Brianna. She called on a Tuesday morning while I was out back doing nothing in particular, just drinking coffee and watching the yard. Her voice was warm in a way that felt rehearsed, like someone who had taken a course in warmth. She said she had been thinking about me, that she felt terrible that she and Daniel had not visited since the wedding, that she wanted to remedy that. She said she had some ideas she would love to share with me. Investment ideas, she said. Dad. That was the first time she called me that. I noticed it. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her she and Daniel were welcome any time. I kept my voice level and I said nothing more than that. She came the following Saturday. Without Daniel, I opened the front door and there she was, in a blazer, holding a folder. Behind her, parked at the curb, was a car I did not recognize. A man sat inside it. He did not get out. He just sat there. I invited her in. I made coffee. She sat at my kitchen table and put the folder in front of her and folded her hands on top of it with the careful patience of someone who believes they are about to win something. She began with flattery. She told me the house was lovely. She told me I seemed sharp, lucid, incredibly well preserved for your age. Those were her exact words. She told me Daniel spoke of me with such admiration. I poured my coffee. I sat down. I let her talk. Then she opened the folder. She had done research. That was the first thing I understood. Inside that folder were property records, addresses, parcel numbers. She had pulled public records on Margaret's estate, on the LLC, on the properties. She had not found everything. Patricia had structured things carefully, but she had found enough to know that I was not what I appeared to be. She slid a single sheet across the table. Property tax records for one of the commercial units, filed under the LLC name Margaret had chosen 20 years ago, Wild Rose Properties LLC. I found this, she said. I just want us to be a family, Dad. I want to understand what we're working with so that Daniel and I can plan properly. He deserves to know what his future looks like. I looked at that sheet of paper for a long time. I want to tell you something, friends, because some of you have been in a room like that. Some of you have sat across from someone who is smiling at you while they're taking inventory of everything you own. I know that feeling. It goes very still inside you. Not angry, not frightened, just still. I picked up that sheet of paper. I looked at it. I set it back down. Brianna, I said. Where is Daniel? He's at home, she said. I thought it would be better if just the two of us talked first. He doesn't know you're here? She hesitated. Half a second. He knows I was coming to visit you. That was not an answer. And she knew that I knew it. I stood up. I went to the window and I looked at the man still sitting in the car at the curb. Then I turned back to her and I asked her, very quietly, who that man was. She said he was a friend. I said I thought it was interesting that she had brought a friend to a family visit, and that her friend appeared to be taking photographs of my house with his phone. Her jaw moved, just slightly. I told her I needed her to do something for me. I told her I needed her to pick up her folder, call Daniel, and go home. I told her that when Daniel wanted to have a conversation with me about my finances, I would be happy to have that conversation with Daniel. I told her that I was not angry, and that I held no ill will toward her, but that I wanted her to leave my home. She left. She did not finish her coffee. That night, Daniel called. He was not the Daniel I knew. His voice had an edge I had never heard before, a borrowed anger that did not quite fit him, like a jacket someone else had picked out. He said he had a right to know what his inheritance looked like. He said he was my only family. He said that if something happened to me, he needed to be prepared, and that Brianna was only trying to help organize things. He used the word transparency 4 times. I counted. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I said, Daniel, do you remember the summer your mother and I took you to Asheville? You were 12. You climbed Lover's Leap Trail and you were terrified, but you did it anyway, and your mother cried at the top because she was so proud. There was silence on the line. I remember that boy, I said. I'd like to talk to that boy. Not this version. He hung up. The next 3 weeks were the hardest. Daniel did not call. Brianna called twice, once with a softer approach, almost apologetic, asking if we could start over. I was polite. I was warm. I gave her nothing. The second time, her voice had lost the softness. She mentioned, almost casually, that she knew some people who specialized in elder financial assessments, that families sometimes had to make difficult decisions about whether an aging parent was managing their affairs competently. I held the phone against my ear and said nothing for a moment. Then I told her I appreciated her concern and that I had an excellent attorney and an excellent accountant and that they both had my full confidence. She did not call again after that, but the man in the car came back. On a Thursday morning, I saw him park down the block. On a Saturday, I saw a car I did not recognize slow down in front of my house and stop for longer than made sense. I am not a man who frightens easily. I spent 30 years in the field as an engineer, working in conditions that would make most people uncomfortable. But I am also not a fool. I called Patricia. She already knew. Patricia told me that someone had submitted a formal records request to the county assessor's office for all properties connected to Wild Rose Properties, LLC. She told me the request had come through a firm she recognized, a small outfit that specialized in asset location, typically hired by creditors, attorneys, or people looking to gain leverage in estate or family disputes. She said, with a calmness that I had always admired in her, "Gerald, your daughter-in-law hired someone to find out what you're worth." Patricia told me not to worry. She told me that Margaret had thought of this, that the LLC structure, the way the operating agreement was written, the way beneficiary designations were set, all of it had been designed with exactly this kind of scenario in mind. She said, "The properties are not in your name personally. A judgment against you personally touches nothing. A legal challenge to the LLC would require grounds that don't exist. Brianna is going to spend money she doesn't have on a problem she cannot solve." I asked Patricia if I should tell Daniel. She said, "That's not a legal question, Gerald. That's a father question." I sat with that for a long time. What I want you to understand, friends, and some of you are going to understand this in a way that cuts close, is that the grief of this was never about the money. It was never about Brianna or the folder or the man in the car. The grief was sitting in my house on a November evening, looking at a photograph of my son at 12 years old standing at the top of a mountain with his arms out, and wondering where that boy had gone and how much of his disappearance was my fault. Margaret would have known what to do. She always knew. She had this quality of seeing through the fog of a situation directly to the thing that mattered. I would get tangled up in facts and logic. She would go straight to the heart of it. I missed that. I miss it every single day in 100 small ways that no one sees. But I also heard her. I heard what she had told Patricia to tell me. She had loved us both, me and Daniel, and she had known that protecting one of us might mean weathering the other. She had made her decision before she died, so that I would not have to make it alone. In December, 2 things happened. The first, Patricia received formal notification that a legal inquiry had been initiated on behalf of Daniel and Brianna, questioning the validity of the LLC structure and my competency as managing member, citing my age and what they described as concerning financial decision-making. Patricia told me this with the tone of someone reporting that a mosquito had landed on the window screen. The second, Daniel showed up at my door alone. No Brianna, no folder, no one in a car at the curb, just my son, in a heavy coat, looking like he hadn't slept well in several weeks. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I had just come back from the diner on Caldwell Street, and I pulled into the driveway, and there he was, sitting on the front step. I got out of the truck and I looked at him for a moment. "You want coffee?" I said. He nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Brianna had laid out her folder 2 months before, and Daniel was quiet for a long time. I let him be quiet. I have learned, in 67 years, that some silences are doing necessary work, and the kindest thing you can do is not interrupt them. Finally, he said, "She hired someone, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." He put his hands flat on the table. He has Margaret's son in his hands, long fingers, careful gestures. "I didn't know about the investigator," he said. "I knew she pulled some public records. I told myself it was just practical, organized. That's how she is." He stopped. "I found the invoices. The firm she hired. The records requests going back 6 weeks. I did not say anything. I confronted her," he said. "We've been fighting for 3 weeks. I looked at my son. I thought about what Margaret had said, that the money would show who people really are. I thought about Brianna and her folder and the rehearsed warmth in her voice on that first phone call. And then I thought about something else. I thought about the fact that my son, My quiet, careful, emotionally distant son had found those invoices, had confronted his wife, and had then gotten in his car and driven 4 hours to sit on his father's front step on a Sunday afternoon. That told me something. That told me the boy at the top of the mountain was still somewhere inside the man sitting at my kitchen table. Daniel, I said, there are things about your mother's estate that I should have told you a long time ago. Not because you have a claim to them. You don't. Not yet. And not the way Brianna imagined. But because you are my son, and you deserve to know who your mother was and what she built. I got up and went to the office and came back with a folder of my own. Not Patricia's, not a legal document, but a simple folder that I had put together over the past few weeks, as if I had known this conversation was coming. Inside it were photographs. Margaret at a closing on her first rental property, 1,998, holding the keys up and laughing so hard her eyes were closed. A hand-drawn map she had made of a neighborhood she was analyzing in 2004, with notes in the margins in her handwriting. A letter she had written to Patricia, which Patricia had shared with me after the funeral, in which she described what she wanted for me and for Daniel, and for the life that would go on after she was gone. I put it in front of him. He looked at the photograph of his mother for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. She built all of it, he said. She built all of it, I said. And she protected all of it. And she protected me. And she was thinking about you, too, the real you, not whatever version of yourself you've been living in these past few months. He stayed for dinner. He stayed for 2 days. We drove out to 2 of the properties on Monday morning. I had never done that with him before, never shown him. He walked through a duplex that his mother had purchased in 2003 for $60,000 and was now worth nearly $400,000. And he was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are recalibrating something important. On the way back in the truck, he asked me what I needed from him. Not what he would get, what I needed. I told him I needed him to be honest with himself about his marriage. He nodded slowly. That is not my story to finish. Whatever Daniel decides about Brianna, about his life in Raleigh, about the careful emotional distance he has kept from the people who love him that belongs to him, I am not here to tell you that everything resolved cleanly, because it has not. He went back to Raleigh. There are lawyers involved now, and not the kind Patricia uses. The future of his marriage is something I do not know. What I know is this. The legal challenge to the LLC was withdrawn in January. Patricia sent me a one-line email. They found nothing, because there is nothing to find. Margaret was thorough. I read that email sitting in my truck in the parking lot of the diner on Caldwell Street, and I put the phone down, and I looked out through the cracked side mirror at the gray winter street, and I thought, she really was. I still drive the same truck. The heater still only works on the driver's side. I still eat lunch at the diner on Tuesdays, and the coffee is still $1.50, and the waitress still calls everyone Han. I am 67 years old and I live simply, and I am not ashamed of any of it, because the life I live is the one I chose, with the woman I chose, and no one can take the shape of that from me. There is something I want to say to those of you who are somewhere in the middle of what I have been through, sitting at a table across from someone who is smiling while they take inventory of you, or lying awake wondering if the people around you love you, or love what you might leave behind. I want to say, your gray hair is not your weakness, it is your knowledge. Every quiet year of your life, every careful decision, everything you built and protected and carried that is not nothing, that is everything. And the people who underestimate you because of your age, or your old truck, or your flannel shirts, are making a mistake that belongs entirely to them. Margaret knew that. She built 11 properties, and an LLC, and a legal structure so tight that a firm of professional investigators could spend 6 weeks on it and walk away empty-handed, and she did it all while making it look like nothing more than a woman who was good at math. I was married to that woman for 31 years, and I still catch myself, some mornings, underestimating how much she loved me, how far ahead of the problem she always was. I keep her photograph on the windowsill in the kitchen, the one from the 1,998 closing, keys held up, laughing with her eyes closed. On hard days, when the house feels too quiet and the winter comes through the walls of this old place, I look at that photograph and I hear her voice, steady and certain, the way it always was. Be quiet about it, Gerald. The money will show who people really are. She was right. She was always right. And I am grateful, every single day, that I listened. Sometimes the greatest thing someone who loves you can do is prepare you for a battle you don't even know is coming. Margaret never got to stand beside Gerald on that difficult afternoon, but her quiet years of careful work, her foresight, her love written into legal documents and property records showed up at exactly the right moment. The people who truly love us have a way of protecting us long after they're gone. Trust that, and build your life accordingly. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to entertain you while leaving behind a lesson worth carrying into your day.